cocktail sauce, Roquefort, horseradish, piquant, piquant, P-I-Q-U-A-N-T, piquant mayonnaise. To a half-pint jar of Best Foods mayonnaise, add 2 tablespoons of chopped olives and 2 tablespoons chopped bread and butter pickles.
Well, if you got a dollar on just a lousy down, you know that I got rhythm that could suit your budget fine.
Hey, this is Patrick with Trusty Huckster Mercantile. Welcome to my channel. Wanted to share a little bit of a haul video with you that maybe goes into a little bit of a mini deep dive, a shallow dive, if you will, that is going to include a collection of cookbooks that I picked up. I always am on the lookout for cookbooks, but I usually only come across 1 or 2 at a time. I really like the older the better. You know, I do like the kitschy, I do like the fun ones, but I really like when you get into the antique ones, and particularly ones during the Depression, because they're just a different style of cooking, because it'll also talk about, you know, how to save money, things like that. It's a whole lifestyle. Now, admittedly, I've never really made any recipes from these older cookbooks, but I'm usually fascinated by some of the recipes that are in them. So this particular case, I had the opportunity of picking up a couple dozen cookbooks that all were from the 60s and before. They actually dated from the 1920s through the 1960s. So I went through the collection and I kind of handpicked the ones, either the ones that I could specifically figure out the date to, just so I knew exactly what era they were, or just the ones that I felt were kind of interesting and worth sharing, and I want to share them with you. In almost all cases, yeah, pretty much every case, these will all eventually be for sale. So if you see anything that you like and you want to claim it, just drop me a message and we can probably work something out. So the oldest one I have, I mentioned they go back to the 20s. This one's barely in the 20s, but it is from 1929. And the reason I like this one, a couple things. One, it is a brand cookbook. So it is specifically for the Best Food brands, Best Food mayonnaise, and it is copyrighted 1929. So if we all remember our history lessons, 1929 was when the stock market crashed, the most significant crash to trigger the Great Depression. So that happened in October of 1929. This just says it was published in 1929, but I'm pretty sure it was prior to that actual event, prior to the start of the Depression, because there is reference to throwing parties and how many guests you're going to have in your home, bigger scale cooking, bigger scale entertaining, which pretty much disappears once the cookbooks start getting issued during the Depression era. So this one was the Best Foods Home Economics Service. So something that was a fairly common trend through most of these older cookbooks. There was a little letter that was included in the beginning. This one was signed "Most cordially yours, Martha Adams, the Best Foods Home Economics Service." So it goes into, and this is also fairly common for some of the older recipe books, it kind of goes into like almost a narrative. So this is, you know, what's vogue in salads. And so every salad has its place. Simple salads for a hearty dinner. As a main dish for luncheon or supper, dessert is the place for fruit salads. And then talks about variations and then sauces to go with them, tartar sauce. I have never had a salad with tartar sauce. I don't think I ever want to have a salad with tartar sauce. Cocktail sauce, Roquefort, horseradish, piquant, piquant, P-I-Q-U-A-N-T, piquant mayonnaise. To a half-pint jar of Best Foods mayonnaise, add 2 tablespoons of chopped olives and 2 tablespoons chopped bread and butter pickles. So the pickles are kind of turning it into a tartar sauce, but the olive sends it just in the wrong direction. Celery mayonnaise, anchovy mayonnaise, curry dressing. Oh, that's interesting. It's curry powder, chutney, cream cheese, frozen cream cheese, sweet fruit, frozen cream mayonnaise, and French dressing. So you've got all these different dressings all in the front with some recipes of how to make them. And then it gets into like the traditional recipes. So you even have, which is not common, you actually have a photograph of the tomato and endive endive salad. But then, yeah, this is a little bit more common. It wasn't really until you got into much more contemporary cooking that like every recipe had a picture. You know, for those who eat with your eyes first, these would just give you the recipes and the names. So, you know, these are relatively innocent. Cabbage spice, summer potato salad, Thousand Island salad, tomato surprise, vegetable cubes, how creative, raw beet and horseradish salad. But what I liked about this one is because it is a branded cookbook, it does actually then give you kind of like, you know, here are all the products that you should be buying. So this is, again, from 1929, fairly straightforward. Again, some more pictures. This is of the Macedon fruit salad. Maybe edible. But shortly after this one was published, the Depression hit. So the next set I do have a few that were from the 30s, and right off the bat, this one unfortunately I can't find a date on it. I did Google it and find some references to it. Everyone pretty much felt that it was a 30s cookbook, but no one could specifically give the date. It is a Metropolitan Life Insurance Company cookbook, which they made these through, I think, at least into the 50s, if not later. So this just happens to be an early one. You can see it's called 3 Meals a Day, but you can also see it's suggested for good food at low cost, because that ends up being what some of the recipes start focusing on, because now you're trying to make your money, you know, stretch farther because of the Depression. So what I found interesting on this one, this was before the days of a food pyramid. What this is telling you is what's important if you're trying to stretch your dollar. This is what you should always have in your home. There's no meat listed as a requirement. So the only thing that they are saying, your family needs at least these foods. When every penny counts, buy milk, bread and cereals, vegetables, and fruit. And so a lot of the recipes focus on just using those materials. It gives you like a minimum week's food supply, whether you have a family of 2, 3, 4 people or a family of 5, 6, and 7. It tells you how many pounds of vegetable, how many quarts of milk, suggestions of what to do with them, how to plan your meals for the week. So this one, it does include recipes, but a lot more of this is about planning, and it's really a lot more is about focusing on how to stretch your budget. But as you get to the back, again, it's not no photographs in this one, no images of the food. But you do have the recipes, creamed and escalloped dishes, cream soup, oatmeal soup. Are we catching the poverty theme here? Fish chowder, how to make an omelet, American chop suey. I don't think I knew that was a thing back in the 30s. Tamale pie, also interesting choice. Pea timbales, thought that was a party. Okay, I don't know what that is. Brown sugar cake. So they are letting you, use some of your food scarcity to make cake. But it is issued by the Metropolitan Life Company. Their little logo here says, "The light that never fails," which I didn't realize was their thing. So that was from the 30s. Again, there's a question about when that one specifically came out. But what I found encouraging was this one was in 1932. It is still a branded cookbook, so you are dealing with the fact this is a chocolate manufacturing company. So maybe testing a little bit of the waters. But in 1932, hey, you can afford, or you should be buying chocolate, and here's what you can do with that chocolate. So this was the Baker's Best Chocolate Recipes from the Walter Baker and Company. So I thought it was, when I first saw it, I thought it was just like how to bake with chocolate, but it's actually Walter Baker. So this is another branded. And the company, the product that they sold was La Belle Chocolatier. So that must have been their individual product. So you've got that on the middle. They were based in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and this was copyrighted in 1932 by the General Foods Corporation. So this must have been like a subsidiary of General Foods. You could order an actual big cookbook that was available. 400 years of popularity. And then it talks a little bit how to, hints of how to cook with chocolate, adding chocolate into recipes, how to measure the chocolate. But my favorite, it starts out right with the beverages. So all these different ways of using chocolate in French chocolate, iced cocoa, cracked cocoa, hot chocolate, Brazilian chocolate, reception chocolate, baker's breakfast cocoa syrup, chocolate eggnog, chocolate malted milk, chocolate evaporated milkshake, frosted chocolate. I might have to try some of these. Okay, except for the last one, mint chocolate. Bleh. Yeah, we're gonna skip that one. And then it talks. Then you get an entire section on chocolate cakes, cookies, and eclairs. So you've got all of those recipes. Oh, it does actually have some pictures. So this one has, what is this picture of? Favorite devil's food cake. So you do have some images, and actually in color, which is kind of nice. An image of a chocolate roll. Not sure what makes that a roll, but you know, okay. Black chocolate cake, marshmallow chocolate loaf, chocolate crispies. Get a picture of that one. And the recipes are, like, even though this is from the 30s, relatively straightforward. Again, it's branded, and remember, this was part of it's Walter Baker, but it was a division of General Foods. So when it gets into some of the recipes, like the Snow White chocolate roll, which requires 4 eggs, 6 tablespoons of sifted Swan's Down cake flour. So they're specifying the brand. 6 tablespoons of Baker's breakfast cocoa. Let's see, what else? Baker's coconut, Baker's unsweetened chocolate, cake flour, Baker's Swan's Down, yeah, cake flour. Actually, here's an interesting one. So the chocolate drop cakes, there's a little recipe there at the bottom. It says 1½ teaspoons of baking powder, but there's a little asterisk after it. If you jump down to the bottom, it says Calumet baking powder used. With other types of baking powders, use increased amounts as recommended by the manufacturers. So I'm assuming Calumet must have been part of General Foods, but it's interesting that they're not requiring it. And I also didn't know that different brands of baking powder require different amounts to be used. I kind of thought they were all interchangeable. So, and then this is my favorite part of this cookbook. It's the centerfold. So check out those graphics. So you've got all the different products that were part of the General Foods Company and under the Walter Baker division. You know, that's right in the center. Pop out those staples. You got a beautiful framed picture. You'll lose the recipe for fudge 4 o'clocks, chocolate eclairs, Othellos, and the introduction to the frostings, fillings, and sauces section, but you'd have some pretty cool art for your kitchen. So that's, you know, we're still technically in the Depression, but we're starting to move out of it, and they're encouraging you to say, look, you've been eating oatmeal soup for years. Add some cocoa to your diet. And then you still get into the later, what I found really interesting about this one was it was issued in 1934. So it was originally in 1934, so it was still like, you're still in the Depression. That's still going to be something people were still probably feeling a little bit because it kind of carried to some level basically up until World War II started. But they revised it, and this is the revised edition from 1938. So what they probably found is that they were probably a little more austere in 1934, and they're loosening it up a little bit to 1938, changing, you know, availability, because this is talking about better buymanship. So it's like a huckster cookbook. So it's taking advantage of household finance. So it's available from the Doctor of Family Finance's Household Finance Corporation and subsidiaries. Enjoy Household Inspiration radio show featuring Edgar A. Guest every Wednesday evening over on CBS. So this one, it's a little bit more like how to grade your poultry, types of poultry available at the market, cost of edible poultry. Okay, there's a lot of poultry. Some stuff about dealing with eggs, how to grade eggs, dried eggs, fish. So there's a lot more, like basically up until you get to the middle, it's just a lot more of an instructional book of how to plan your household finances. But there are some recipes that are in here, primarily in, you know, how to actually prep some of the foods that are listed. So this one doesn't have as much of a usability factor from the kitchen's perspective, but there's just a lot of really cool information, and considering a lot of this information would have been specific to the 30s, it's kind of like a little historic document that I thought was definitely worth picking up as part of the better buymanship. But then we hit World War II. So the next books, I actually have several books from the 1940s, and it's also somewhat interesting because if you again, let's like dust off our history banks and our history class books, but America entered the war after pretty much everyone else did. So Germany invaded Poland in 1939. So the war effectively started in 1939 because the allies of Poland then had to also declare war against Germany. And it wasn't until Pearl Harbor in December of 1941 that America entered the war. And so I have one cookbook that actually falls in a very specific time, 1940. So war was already making. Now it takes some time to publish a book. So you also figure that this may have been started prior to the invasion of Poland. And again, that was in Europe. And when we didn't have a 24-hour news cycle, the world worked a little bit differently. So it may have taken a little while for this to come out, but it came out and was published in 1940. So technically, the United States was not yet in the war, but we knew what was going on by that point over in Europe. And so there was a little bit, to me, a little bit of patriotism kind of put into this, but it's falling on somewhat deaf ears because it's time for a party. It wasn't a time for everyone to have a party, but I guess if you were still in the United States, it was time for a party and you could bring all of your creepy-ass dolls with you. And this was a branded cookbook that, again, focused on Swan's Down cake flour and Calumet baking powder. So, again, published in 1940, this ends up being another branded book. Talks a little bit how to use Calumet baking powders. Talks about how to plan for your parties. So for your red letter days, all the different types of parties you could plan. So kind of not reading the room very well, kind of maybe a little bit tone deaf, but life was still going on. You were still getting ready for weddings. You were still having babies. You were still planning for home entertainment. Technically, the Great Depression, historically, who knows if the people living through it when it ended, it's just things started getting better. So things were getting better. The war was coming and America didn't want to have anything to do with it because we'd already gone through our own little war. But this is what we came up with. 16 cake recipes. Make 44 different cakes. So I guess with 16 cake recipes, you can make 44 different cakes. All of them with their own creepy little doll associated with them. So this one, again, they're celebratory. There's a bride's cake. It was kind of, again, hindsight's 2020. They did not know that we were about to enter the war in 1941. Could we or should we have been doing something more already at that point? It really depended on who you asked back then. So I'm sure this book did very well. I'm sure it was very popular because there's a lot of fun recipes in here. It's just kind of, again, a little bit of an interesting time capsule. But I feel like when they finally did the cover, just by putting those stars on it, they kind of gave it a little bit of a little American twist. A little bit, hey, celebrate the USA. But by the time I get to my next recipe book or cookbook, we are in 1942. So we've already entered the war. Now again, you have to keep in mind, anytime you're publishing anything, it takes time to plan it. So this was probably being planned in 41. We didn't technically enter the war until December of 41. So again, it may have been maybe not reading the room very well. But once again, by the time this came out in 1942, as far as I'm concerned, that's a red, white, and blue cover. So they started recognizing, let's, go USA. So you've got another branded cookbook. This is for Royal baking powder. See if they say anything mean about Calumet. But there's little ads inside. You've got the little, what is that? Cake flour along with the Royal baking powder. So this one was published in 1942 by Standard Brand. So that must have been the parent company of Royal. So this one has some ads, dropped throughout it. But it's ads for their own product. A little bit, again, some cooking instruction. So they're always, all of these are really good training guides in the beginning, and then you get into the recipes. This one is a very thin, there's no spine or anything. This one really, it doesn't have any photographs. There's no color illustrations. But you've got fudge frosting, 7-minute frosting, angel cake, coffee sponge cake. Because you're dealing with baking powder, you're baking. So there's a lot of sweets in here. The cookie jar, sugar cookies, soft molasses cookies, biscuit variations, muffins, quick loaf breads. And then, let's see, for free, you can get the Royal Cookbook. More than 200 excellent recipes for cakes, cookies, quick breads, meat and fish dishes. Right to Royal Baking Powder, Department S in New York City. So, that was Royal, 1942. And then we get into 1945, which is when the war ended. But again, probably this was being created in 1944. So we were hopeful we were going to get out of that pretty soon. But same thing. Let's put some stars on it. Let's basically put some red, white, and blue on the cover to basically encourage, the home front, encourage USA. So this one is Recipes for Good Eating by Crisco. So another branded cookbook. So I don't know if they don't exist now. I can't say I've ever really been in the market for a contemporary cookbook, but this definitely seemed to be a thing back in the day, that the brands would create their own recipe books specifically on what you to do or how to use their individual products. Actually, I do remember growing up, probably in the 80s, maybe 70s, no, it's probably 80s. I think it was a big hardcover, it was really big, and it was like America's Best Brands cookbooks. And that actually is how it was written. So if you needed, chocolate chips, it said they were Hershey's chocolate chips, or if you needed a certain type of flour or whatever, it did list the brands. And I'm trying to remember if it had a brand, like if it was, it was probably like a parent company issued it. So I guess it was kind of the same thing, but these little ones I just think are fun because they're a little bit more of a snapshot. So frying, lots of stuff, lots of pages on frying. Well, it is Crisco, so why am I surprised? Pastries, this one does have photographs. So you've got pastries and biscuits and muffins, cakes and icings. Let's see, anything interesting in the centerfold? Looks like we got something in color. No, wait a minute. No, nothing interesting in the centerfold. But we do have some color pictures. So, ice cream with cupcakes. Did it teach you how to make the ice cream? Does not teach you how to make ice cream, because I hope Crisco does not go into ice cream. Anyway, so more photographs, recipes pretty much the same, but they're starting to be laid out, more where they're keeping the ingredients separate as opposed to putting them all in paragraph form. Part of it may just because paper may be a little bit more available, so you're not rationing for space anymore. But this is where I think we start seeing more like what contemporary recipe books would start looking like. The next one I would have thought was earlier based on the image, but here's what Betty Crocker once looked like, and I would have thought that looked like the 30s. But this does have a copyright of 1948. So this is the Betty Crocker Chiffon Cake Recipes and Secrets, with 26 helpful hints. So some instructions of how to actually do the baking. This one, their brand was Soft as Silk Cake Flour. So you had that brand being pushed, but Betty Crocker. Now this one does have colored photographs of some of the cakes, but still not a color photograph for every item. But again, the recipes are separated out. You have the list of the ingredients in advance and then the instructions. So it's a little bit easier to read. Some nice full color photographs. Actually, that's a really cool Depression glass plate in that one. So we moved into the 40s. Then the war is over. Recipes start changing a little bit because now we are the land of plenty. We are all happy. We are the golden era, and we've hit the 50s. And that's also, now I did not know this, that is also when Pillsbury started their cook-off. So this was the second Pillsbury bake-off, and this was in 1950. So it must have started in 1949. Amazing how I can do that math. But this one is 100 prize-winning recipes from the baking contest, which was held at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City in December of 1950. So technically, this might have even been 1951 that this might have been published. There's no actual copyright on it. But a couple more pictures, still not one for every individual recipe, but again, a lot more effort being placed into how the ingredients are structured, as well as then the instructions of how to make it. The Centerfold is the $5,000 cherry wink. So this was the first prize winner of the junior contest. So you could make the cherry winks, and you've got an entire page of all of the instructions. Now this one, because again, technically it was sponsored by Pillsbury, it does ask you to sift Pillsbury Best Enriched Flour. Actually, that's the only brand name that got used in that one. Yeah, it looks like it's just the Pillsbury Best Enriched Flour is the only thing that's popping up as a brand. But you've got the brand book, you've got the Best Enriched Flour right there on the back. And so we've entered into the 50s, and so now it's all about making cooking fun and for profit. And then we get into the fun graphics. So this one unfortunately doesn't have an actual copyright date, but from the graphics, I put this into the 50s as well. This happens to be from the Borden kitchen. So Elsie the cow. Borden's is actually based just down the road from me here in Illinois. But this one, again, got some illustrations. Recipes are structured the way we're used to. And you've got main dishes, you've got vegetables. What I like about this one is they just started, again, making cooking a little bit more fun. They even put in little illustrations so that even though you're not seeing a picture for every individual recipe, you do have some cool, you know, illustrations that go along with it, including this entire cover. I mean, just check the way that whole thing's been illustrated. So that's going in the 50s, and then you get into the 60s. So you've got creative cookery with chicken of the sea tuna. So this one, you know, it's still technically a cookbook, but it's really more like a big brochure. There was no copyright on this one, but it does show that it was for the 50th anniversary of Chicken in the Sea, and Chicken in the Sea came out in 1914. So this was from the 1964, is the 1964 cookbook. So this one, you know, a lot of quick tuna tips, dinners in a dish, party dishes, and you do have like illustrations, but not technical versions of the actual food. But fun illustrations. Hate to see it go rip apart, but some of those drawings would be fun in a junk journal. And then the last one I have is going into, it's 1965. So in the mid-60s. What I found interesting about this, if you've watched my channel before, zip codes tend to be a really easy way, in my opinion, to date a lot of things, including ephemera, because a lot of times the addresses get put on there. And so this is kind of an interesting snapshot in time, because this is 1965, and in 1963, well, from 1948 to 1963 was the 1- and 2-digit zip codes. In 1963, the 1- and 2-digit zip codes became 5-digit zip codes that we are familiar with today. So this is a 1965 copyrighted cookbook, but if you look, it was sent to an address that has a 2-digit zip code still, but it was sent from California with a 5-digit zip code. So the corporate offices had already adjusted to the 5-digit zip code because they were doing the bulk mailing rate, so they were required to do it. But they had people on their mailing list, as you know, this was 2 years, approximately 2 years after the dates change or the zip codes changed, people that still had not updated or were not using their new zip code. So this is just kind of a fun snapshot in time, because that wouldn't exist for much longer. At some point, they would switch over to the 5-digit. So this is kind of a fun from 1965. The Wonderful World of Cooking. This evidently was part of multiple volumes, because this is volume 1, French cooking. So you've got, I don't know, I'm assuming they were all international just based on the graphic there. So maybe volume 2 were some of the other countries. But again, a branded item, Fleischmann's margarine right there in the inside cover. Another letter, greetings from Ruth Conrad Bateman. Some cool illustrations again. So again, making cooking fun. More ads. So we got a Contadina tomato sauce ad smack in the middle. Borden's Cremora ad. Actually, that's interesting. This is not the Borden one. I was like, wait, this is the Borden's one? So Borden Cremora, but then Contadina tomato sauce. So this was Harwood and Tjarden. Okay. I don't know what that is. If that's the ownership of, it's interesting that these brands are showing up in here. So I don't know if they owned those brands. I couldn't tell you for the life of me who owns Borden now, much less who owned it in 1965. Trend dish soap. No, is that dish soap? Yeah, dishwashing liquid. So it's kind of like, That's owned by Purex. So it's almost like we've got into a magazine because there's true ads, but there's also true recipes built into here as well. So that is the collection that I picked up. I just thought it was kind of interesting how they progressed, not only the graphics, the way the menus, the way the recipes are written, and just how they treated food. You know, was it a rare commodity in the Depression versus let's have fun with it and draw pretty pictures and fun illustrations all around the recipes. But so hopefully you found it interesting and, you know, just get an idea. So when you check out some of the books, like I said, did not have copyright, so I had to kind of figure it out or do some research into them. So hopefully recognizing some of the graphics, recognizing some of the way they were printed, gives you some idea if you come across some cookbooks on your own. Maybe you can figure out what era they were based in as well. So I hope you found this interesting. If you did, I encourage you to give the video a thumbs up. If you're not already subscribing, well, first, congratulations for your dedication for getting this far without being a subscriber. But I'd love if you actually did choose to subscribe. And go ahead and put it in the comments. What was your favorite or cookbook that I showed? Or what is your favorite era of the graphics or the types of cookbooks that came out? I'd love to hear what everyone has to say. So thanks so much for joining me. Thanks for letting me take up your time. And thanks for putting your trust in Trusty Huckster. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Well, show me a sign if you're wishing me to stay. Otherwise, I say goodbye, finish out the day. And that sunrise in the morning and you got nothing to say. Oh, that's when I'll be headed on my